What if I told you that a story could teach your child more history, science, math, and literature than a year of textbooks? Welcome to the Story Schooling Podcast. I'm Angel Selden, author of Curiouser.
And I'm Sandy Fouts, co-founder of Wonderwell Learning.
This is the most important thing you can do in your homeschool or even as a parent.
Yes, it's as a parent.
I have a lot of
you don't
parents.
have to homeschool.
No, a lot of parents whose kids attend public school or private school or charter school come to me and very curious about what I do. And I love what you do. I love your approach, but I can't homeschool. And this is what I tell all of them.
Yeah.
Start reading aloud to your children every day. It should take precedence over their homework even. I read aloud to my third child who decided to start attending public school in 7th grade every evening. And I said, this is important. We read at 7 o'clock together every night. We read, at the time we were reading 10 pages a day from Roots by Alex Haley. And he got more out of that book. He learned more intellectually and had more character development by far, many times more from that book that year in 7th grade than he did in his U.S. history class. And it was so connective for us to experience this story together and to go through all the feelings that you feel when Kunta Kinte is experiencing being captured from his home in Africa and his trip over on the slave ship.
I don't even know that story. I think you've told me about it before, but I've never read it.
I think it's either my favorite book or second favorite book of all time. It's close with Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass is the other one that it's in the running with for the number one spot.
Sandy, you told me about a book you read called The Reading Promise. You read it when your third child, Jeff, was 8. How did this girl's story inspire you to commit to reading aloud to him every night? And how did it affect Jeff's education and your relationship with him?
Her father was a librarian, and they don't homeschool, but he read to her every night. And they decided one time, she was probably 8 years old, and they decided, hey, she was young, this point in time where, you know, you love doing things with your parents. And she said, we should see how many days in a row we can read together. So they decided to make a goal, and they set a goal, I think it was for 1 month. And then they wanted to put a reward on that. Like, if we do it, what should we do? And they didn't have a lot of money, and pizza was her favorite thing. So they decided they would go out to eat pizza if they hit 1 month. So they had rules, parameters around it. And the parameters were they had to read for 10 minutes. It had to be before midnight. I think those were the only rules that they had. And so she tells this.
Was she?
They started when she was 8, and he would even, because he's a librarian, he would like practice reading it before he would even read to her. So he had already read to her. It wasn't new that he just started reading to her, but to be consistent and never miss a night, that was new. And so she tells the story of how they hit that first goal, and then while they're out eating pizza together, they set their next goal. And I don't remember how long the next goal was, but eventually it was a whole year. What if we could do it for a whole year? And then, of course, at that point in time, they couldn't break it. And so they read every night without missing a single night. And there was one time when he was so sick and he had laryngitis, and it was so difficult for him to read, but he still read to her. And there were times when, you know, they would have to plan around schedules or maybe even do it over the phone. And sometimes they even didn't read necessarily a book because they realized they wouldn't be home in time. So they might be at an event, and he's reading the program of the event to her just so that they didn't miss the night. But it ends with her going to college and him calling her on the phone and reading to her for the very last time. The last time he read aloud to her was when she was her first day of college. And that book was super profound to me. It just hit me really hard when I heard that story and I read that book. And so I have 6 children. However, at the time I made this promise, I talked to one of my sons, to Jeffrey, about it. And we decided we were going to have a reading promise. Now, we weren't that good, but it was really, really rare that we missed a night until he was probably about 17. And that's when a dynamic shifted with us that it just didn't. I needed sleep and he was never home. But that
Had the same experience with my son.
there were so many things. So when somebody asked me, about what's the most important thing they could do for their child with their child, I will always say reading aloud, because that created so many different things. And to me, it became more, it wasn't even about the story that we were reading together. When I would go into his room at night, because it was typically at night that I read to him, he would just start telling me all of these things that a teenager probably typically doesn't tell their mom. And it was just this opportunity for him to just open up. And he knew every night that I would be there and that we would read together. And so all the things that he had on his mind or weighing him down, he just spilled them all out. And sometimes I was in there for a half hour of him just chatting before we even started the book or after we finished reading. And we talked before about how reading develops relationships. And for me, that was the most important thing I ever did for my relationship with him. And I felt the shift back. It wasn't the same when we stopped reading. I didn't have those same moments. We weren't as close. I didn't know as much about his life because that opportunity was no longer there that we took together. And it all started with the book, The Reading Promise. So
Beautiful story. I would agree. That is the most important reason that I read to my kids is it has strengthened our relationships, and it continues to. And I'm sure you've had the same experience where having adult children, I have 2 adult children, one who's almost an adult, and you have 3 adult children, correct? And how often these stories come up in conversation, and especially if they have all heard the same stories, and then it's almost like this shared experience in our minds. I think this helps parents because they just get so worried about knowledge gaps. And they're like, yeah, relationships. Yeah, we can have a great relationship and not read. I would say it will take your relationship to the next level for sure. But the vast majority of knowledge my children have has been acquired from these great stories. Not only the great stories we've read together, but ones they've read on their own as well.
My second son, Zach, was homeschooled through 9th grade, and then he did some time at the local high school. And he told me that the kids, he would always just come up with these random things, or they were talking about things, and he would tell them all of these things. And they finally asked him, like, why do you know all of this stuff? How do you know all this stuff? And he said, well, like, I was homeschooled. So that was his reason.
Enough said.
This is why he knows all these things, because he read so much and he had the freedom, like he just acquired whatever he was interested in. We got books on whatever he was interested in. And so he read about all of these different things and he gained all this knowledge because he was curious about it. And then when you're reading something through story, you remember so much more facts and information when it comes through a story.
Absolutely. And there's so much scientific research that backs that. And that's why, since the beginning of human history, stories have been the main mode of teaching. Even we think of the Greek myths as being like, oh, this weird belief system that people had in ancient Greece. And when actually they were a way to communicate information. These stories were created to deliver messages, which have been lost among us. There's evidence of hunter-gatherer tribes in history, and even still today, people who live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Every evening around the campfire is the sharing of stories by the elders, and they share the story of their people, their history, as well as the tales that have been passed down to teach morals and cautionary lessons.
Which is where the fairy tales. That's where the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales all come. Like that was a lot of their purpose, right? Was to teach the lessons.
And he was just the first person to write those down. Those had been passed down over the centuries and probably had evolved a lot since the original by the time he wrote them down. And that's why you see a lot of the same fairy tales, similar stories in different cultures. Russia has their own story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. China has its own Red Riding Hood story. So these same messages that we use, and there's a wolf in it, these animals that represent evil in our world that are used to help warn our children of danger. Some people may say, I just didn't read much growing up. and I don't remember. Maybe that wasn't part of your family culture. And I hope that our stories will inspire you to start that in your family culture to help you fall in love with stories. I want to start by sharing In A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is one of my favorite books of all time. It's autobiographical, so it's fictionalized, but she draws on her experience growing up in Brooklyn, New York, the daughter of first-generation Americans, Irish and German. And they're the first literate generation in her family. Her mother just had her. The new mother is pouring her heart out to her own mother, saying, "Mother, I am young. Mother, I am just 18. I am strong. I will work hard, mother. But I do not want this child to grow up just to work hard," because she's a cleaning lady. "What must I do, mother? What must I do to make a different world for her? How do I start?" And her mother responds, who is illiterate, and I imagine her saying this in a thick German accent because she's an immigrant from Germany. She says, "The secret lies in the reading and the writing. You are able to read. Every day you must read one page from some good book to your child. Every day this must be until the child learns to read. Then she must read every day. I know, this is the secret." "I will read," promised Katie. "What is a good book?" "There are 2 great books. Shakespeare is a great book. I have heard tell that all the wonder of life is in that book. All that man has learned of beauty, all that he may know of wisdom and living are on those pages." And then she recommends the Bible. "That is the book then, and the book of Shakespeare. And every day you must read a page of each to your child, even though you yourself do not understand what is written down and cannot sound the words out properly." So even if you are in that place where you're like, "I don't even understand this." So I started doing this with my oldest when she was very young. I was like, I have this desire to share Shakespeare with her, but I don't even understand it. I mean, it was like a foreign language to me. You must do this that the child will grow up knowing of what is great. So that's the idea, right? We want them to know of greatness. Okay, then I'm going to skip ahead 30 pages. After supper, Katie read the babies to sleep. She read a page of the introduction to Shakespeare and a page of Begats from the Bible. That was as far as she had gotten to date. Neither the babies nor Katie understood what it was all about. The reading made Katie very drowsy, but doggedly she finished the 2 pages. I hope that inspires you to start. And I'm guessing that most of our listeners are not starting from that place even, starting with a little more knowledge than that.
So I didn't read a lot when growing up. We didn't have a big library.
Hold on a second. Charles is playing the bongos out there. I need to tell him.
He's playing the bongos. Love that.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. My child is interrupting the podcast by playing the bongos in the background.
Okay, so I didn't read a lot as a kid when I was growing up. But I knew that I wanted to read to my kids. It really came when we started homeschooling. And I looked to see, okay, what am I supposed to read to my kids? What are the books that I should be reading? There is no what should you. I know a little bit better than that now, but the book that everybody recommended that every child should read was called Little Britches. And so this is the book that was the first book that I remember reading aloud to my kids. And it was so hard. It was so hard. I feel like that mom. I couldn't read the words. I couldn't even pronounce all of the words. And it was this struggle and it was exhausting. And I would read as much as I could. We'd sit outside, usually on a blanket in the front lawn, and I would do my best to read aloud, but it was terrible. It was so difficult and it was hard. And because I didn't read a lot growing up. And so I think that we all start somewhere, right? You decide that you want to do it and we start somewhere. And so I decided that there was something that I wanted to do. Years later, after I'd been reading aloud to my kids for a really long time, I went back and read Little Britches again. And to me, it just seemed like, oh, this is an easy read. It was simple. It was easy.
Yes.
But it's because of, years of practice reading aloud. So I started at that point where I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand the story. Honestly, I remember not really liking the story. Why did everybody say that I should read this story to my kids? It definitely has good lessons. But at that time, I was such a beginner. I was such a baby when it came to reading aloud that was super, super difficult. So tell me, what do you remember about reading as a kid? Do you have any memories about that?
I remember reading a lot of Sweet Valley Twins and Sweet Valley High. Do you remember those books?
No, because I didn't read. I didn't read as a kid. I didn't even read that.
Right. That might be better than reading trash, which is
true. This is true. The only books I remember reading aloud, or not aloud, but reading to myself, we had a few books on a bookshelf. They were just kind of randomly there. And so I remember reading The Secret Garden, and it became my favorite book because it was the only book that I'd ever read. And then The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Those are the only books I remember as a kid reading. Yes.
Yes, because I was going to talk about this because actually this is the one classic I remember reading as a child too. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about The Secret Garden.
Okay.
I will say this is what got me falling in love with the classics again too, because I had stopped reading in high school because life got too crazy. You know, either I was doing homework and studying, or then I wanted to hang out with friends, go shopping. And so I didn't read much anymore. But if I can share really quickly my story of falling in love with this again.
Yes, please do.
I got into reading again after my first child was born and I was breastfeeding, and I felt like I was breastfeeding all the time, you know, as if you've done that, you understand. And so I was like, what is there to do? Smartphones didn't exist at the time I had my first child. And I'm very grateful because I might have been on my phone all the time. You know, I started watching a lot of TV, but something inside me felt like I don't want my baby being raised with hearing the TV all the time and watching TV. I did that a lot when I was pregnant. So I started reading books. I started with Harry Potter, but then my first classic, my first great book. I don't know. Some people would say Harry Potter's a classic. I don't mean to put you down. Maybe it is. But I read The Secret Garden, and I have to say I saw things in it that I didn't see when I was growing up. So it was it was a magical book, very exciting growing up, this mysterious mansion and this strange boy crying down the corridor and then like going through secret passageways and finding out, you know, hey, it's this strange boy, and being so curious about that, you know. And then the planting of the garden, that really sparked in me a desire to garden when I was little. But yeah, that was when I fell in love all over again. And then I read it to all my children.
So I fairly recently read The Secret Garden to Millie, who's now 10. She's obsessed with gardens right now. I wonder if that's where it came from. I never even thought that might even be where that came from. But I got a very different message of it this last time I read it. I read it a few times. And this last time that I read it, and I don't know if you caught this message out of it, was the power of words, like the importance of, they talk about in the kind of towards the end, they talk about the magic and how, but it's all in what you believe, and only say the things like you must, he tells him, never say that he can't walk. Like those words weren't allowed to ever be said.
Yes.
Because so they changed his thinking from saying that he was a sickly child. And she told him, what's the girl's name? Mary, right? Is it Mary?
Mary Lennox.
So Mary tells him, don't say that. Don't say that anymore. Don't ever say that again. And so she said, whatever you say, that's what you're going to believe. And so my daughter, Millie, and I had this conversation about how powerful words are, and what we say matters, and our reality will become from the things that we say, and that's what we will believe. And so it was it was neat to pull a whole new message out of it. The power of positive thinking is what I pulled out of this time. And I have never pulled that message out of The Secret Garden before, which is why I talked to my daughter a lot about how powerful a reread is. So we think that we read a story and then we put it on the shelf and we don't need to read it again because we've read it before. But when you pull the book out and you read it again and again and again, the power that book has an increasing, I feel like it's an exponential power that it brings. The story means more because you're not just learning the story at that point in time. You know the story. So now you're getting all of the rest of the stuff that's deep in that story that you missed the first time.
You're noticing things.
Because you didn't know it. So
yes. So I think that's the power of, I would say it's similar to, we do this exercise in my micro school where we will look at a painting multiple times. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. And you see new things every time you look at it. There's something about a fresh look. And not just looking longer, but like taking a break, looking away and looking again. And I think it's the same way with books. And also, if you're reading it, if you let a year or 2 or 3 or 4 go by before you read it again, you have more experience and you're looking at that book through a new lens.
So I remember the only other experience, going back to when I was a kid, the only other experience I have that I really remember of powerful reading moments was that my mom read the Little House on the Prairie books to me. And I still have those books, and I've actually read those exact books that my mom read to me. I've read to my kids. Those are the I don't remember my mom reading to me, except for there was this really special point in my life when at night she would come in and she would read this really cool story about a long time ago. And so those became like treasures to me, and those were the only things. And then like I said, I didn't read as a kid at all. My mom asked me one time, because I became obsessed with reading to my kids, she said, "What is this with you in books now? Like, you never read as a kid. What is it?" And I don't know, like, it became this huge passion of mine. I have a huge library sitting in front of me right now that, yeah, reading became this obsession that I had. So I didn't start out with a good history, and even still, like, my vocabulary is not really great. My kids will correct me. Like, I'll go to pronounce a word in a book, and especially Jeff, as I read aloud to him as he got older, he would correct my pronunciation. And I have looked up so many words on how to pronounce words in books. Or my husband would hear me reading, and I would say a word, and then he would pronounce it correctly for me. And so, I'm still not amazing at it. I've gotten much, much better because of all the practice. And that became something that was really, really important to me, that I knew that if I did nothing else, if I read aloud to my kids, then that was a successful day.
Absolutely. A successful homeschool day.
And then moving forward, I think I said, Little Britches was the first experience that I remember reading aloud to my kids, but I somehow knew it was important. So when they were babies, I read very boring books. I was not reading The Secret Garden while I was nursing.
Me too. Well, because you're just learning.
I was reading The Cat in the Hat, and probably some other whatever books landed in my home. And then I started to learn that if this book was really awful to me to read, then maybe, like, if it felt like torture to read this book to my child, there's probably a better book that I could be reading. And I started to get much better at knowing a good book from not as great of a book, and start really collecting and curating my own home library. And I don't know if you have experienced the kind of the inside jokes that come from stories. So, for example, we were reading Oliver Twist, and there's it's been a long time since I read the story.
I love Oliver Twist, but it's been a long time for me too. Maybe I can help.
There's one child who's kind of like in Harry Potter, where you've got the spoiled child, and then there's the neglected child. Yeah. And my kids, forever afterwards, they would play on this, on that again, as they're like teasing each other or whatever. They want mom to feel sorry for them and pretending that their sibling is hurting them. And it was always, "He murdered me." Or another one from Oliver Twist is, they'd come around to get dinner, we're serving dinner, and, "May I have some more, please? Please, may I have some more?" Which is, I think, the first line in Oliver Twist. But these little inside jokes, or these lines, or these quips that we laugh together about because we have this shared story together that we've bonded through. And so these little inside jokes kind of come out of
Yes, I see what you mean. Inside jokes in your family that came from stories that you read together.
It's like, you all know the same story, and you all have this, I mean, I've seen it come from, like, it happen even like with TV shows and stuff, where, somebody will recite a line. But
movie lines.
Yeah, but the same thing.
But how much better that it's from this great book
through stories. So that's just another way that it just connects us, because we all know the same story. We all have the same experience together through story.
Yeah. I have a funny example of that too in our micro school. It was totally this spontaneous idea. This wasn't part of the plan for our year, but decided to create a film adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream using these animal figurines, like little plastic animal figurines. And so different animals were different characters in the story. And then we also had these little fairy dolls one of the girls brought from home. She's like, "I have fairy dolls to play the fairies." "Okay, bring them." These kids quote lines from that all the time. And one of them is, every time, it's not every single time now. For a while, it was every single time. Now it's every so often. They have these different goodbyes that are from the play. And so one is, and it's from the play that they're doing within the play, Pyramus and Thisbe. He says, "Farewell, farewell, my friends, and thus Thisbe ends. Adieu, adieu, adieu." And they say it, you know, they say it in exactly the way the boy who played the part says it. You know, says obviously it's written, so you don't know how it can be recited differently depending on the actor. They say it just like this boy said it. And the other one is, "Adieu, at the Duke's Oak we meet." And so they would say goodbye, adieu, adieu, at the Duke's Oak we meet. And then they get in their cars and go home. Yeah.
And they're like 8, right? The general age of your kids, the age.
They were 8 to 10, 8 to 10 when they made this.
It's so cute.
These 8 to 10-year-olds quoting Shakespeare. It is the funniest thing. And they understand it. And here's what's cool. A lot of it I didn't have to explain. I wanted to make sure they understood what they were saying before they recited the lines. Mm-hmm. Again, this is coming from somebody who, at age 30, Shakespeare was a foreign language, and I decided I would just start studying it. Okay, so before they would record, I would record them saying their lines. I would read a line to them and say, "Do you know what that means?" More than 50% of the time, they got the basic idea, and I might clarify a little, get a little more specific. They'd be like, "I think they're saying this." Yes, they're saying this. And a cloister is referring to a convent, which is where nuns live. Do you know what nuns are? "Oh yeah, da 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 da." And it would spark all these conversations, and then we would
perform the line.
Then we would record. Yeah. We would perform that scene. Yeah.
So I mean, that's the power story, to bring people closer together in so many different ways, and whether that's within families or within groups, you know, in your micro school, the power story to build relationship. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious. Maybe probably a lot of people say read for knowledge.
But actually, things stand out to me that don't stand out to most people. And they see a book like this. So this is one that I'm almost finished reading with my son, A Single Shard by Linda Sue Park. It takes place in 12th century Korea. And it's about a boy who is an orphan and homeless, living under a bridge with an older man who has taken care of him since he was a baby or toddler. And he ends up working for a potter, hoping that he will be able to apprentice for him someday. And, you know, so on the surface, you think, okay, so you're learning a little bit about 12th century Korea.
Okay.
You know, but you have this story. And I think another issue people might have is just that it takes so long to read a book like this. I mean, so we've been reading quite a bit every day, but it'll take us maybe 2 weeks, maybe less, maybe a week and a half to read this book.
It's a fairly short book, though.
It is fairly short. I mean, if we read, 15 pages a day, then it takes us 10 days to read it. It's 150 pages. And it's like, wow. So all that time that you're spending really just to get like a little glimpse into what 12th century Korea is like, There is so much more in here, and I started marking it because I'm writing a study guide for it. We're reading this for our micro school next year. And this is, I'm so excited to talk about character development. I won't jump ahead of myself, though. Okay, page 12. So my 8-year-old son and I, towards the beginning of this book, had an extensive conversation about basic economic theory, specifically supply and demand, that was sparked by this book. Page 12. In my edition. The village of Chulpo faced the sea, its back to the mountains, and the river edging it like a neat seam. Its potters produced the delicate celadon ware that had achieved fame not only in Korea, but as far away as the court of the Chinese emperor. And this is historical fiction, so it is based on their history. They did create celadon pottery at the time in Korea. They were famous for. And so we did some research on that. And what is celadon? We looked up pictures of this celadon pottery, which was a greenish, it's a green-gray color. Chulpo had become an important village for ceramics by virtue of both its location and soil. So we talked about specialization. On the shore of the Western Sea, it had access to both the easiest sea route northward and to plentiful trade with China. And the clay from the village pits contained exactly the right amount of iron to produce the exquisite gray-green color of celadon so prized by collectors. And so I said, well, is something going to be cheaper or more expensive if there's less of it, if it's more rare? Because I said, if they're the only village in their part of the world, at least, that they're familiar with, that has this kind of clay that's rich in iron that produces this color of pottery, then is it going to be worth more money or less money? He's like, well, more money. I wish I could remember word for word. But then I tried to make the connection with shoes. His older brother is a sneakerhead and really into, he'll watch the prices of certain Jordans go up and down in price. Like he watches graphs and the history of pricing and how when it's first released. And so my 8-year-old has overheard a lot of this conversation from my older son. And I said, are Jordans expensive, not expensive? Okay, some of them sell for like $30,000. Why do those Jordans sell for $30,000? He said, well, they are that much when they're first released. Like sometimes they just make a few and they just release those. And when you're the first one to have them, then, it's for the first people to buy them, I can't remember how he said it in his 8-year-old words, but I was like, right. And and he said, and also if it's limited edition. And I'm like, what does that mean? Limited edition? Well, it means they made them for a little bit and then they stopped making them. Okay, so are there a lot of them? Is it rare or is it there are a lot of them? Well, it's rare and there aren't as many of them. Okay, so and you're saying they sell for more then. Okay, so and I said, well, what if nobody wants them? And so then we went down this trail of, going down the supply, exploring the supply end of it and just exploring supply and demand. And okay, so maybe something's very rare in the world. Like there's this, there's a metal that's like toxic and there's not very much of it in the world, but does anybody want it? Well, probably not. I suppose there could be some purpose, but we're keeping it simple for an 8-year-old. Well, nobody wants it. Okay, so but it's rare. I thought you said it was going to be worth a lot. Well, but nobody wants it. So, okay. And then he actually started talking about gold and why gold was valuable. Well, he's like, there's not a lot of it. Or he said, there's actually a lot of it, but it's really hard to get out of the ground, is what he was saying. And so, it might as well be rare because it's so hard to get out of the ground. And anyway, some interesting conversations.
So it's so cool that can happen, but not everybody knows how to make that happen. And so I want to dive a little bit into how do you allow that and create it? And I think one, it's something that comes over time. So the first story you read aloud, you may not spark those kind of really cool, dig deeper conversations. But if you have in your mind that you're allowed to, and your child knows that they're allowed to. So sometimes we have like this strict schedule, like I have to get through 10 pages today. But what if you didn't? Like, what if you knew that, what is the actual goal here? And so that you allowed the freedom to not read a certain amount or not finish the book by a certain time because you took all these tangents. We're so fortunate now that we have things like AI and, internet and all of the resources we have that, like, what if the parent doesn't know those things? Like, I don't know
then you
everything.
Don't need to be the source.
And that's just
yes,
it.
you don't need to be the source of that information.
You can do incredible. I mean, the internet's great, but my daughter and I recently really started using AI, like Chat GPT, to answer some of these questions. And we went on a rabbit hole on sourdough, and it brought up, oh my goodness, all of the different things. We wrote all of this list of questions that we have to like dig deeper in because of one single question. And so I think it's just allowing yourself to know that you can stop and you can explore. And when an idea comes to your mind, just follow it. Like, don't let anything stop that idea. See if it goes anywhere. Ask your kid a question and see where it goes, or allow them to stop and ask a question. And through practice is when those kind of skills develop, because I'm sure it wasn't always that way with you, Angel, where those kind of conversations sparked, but you're on child number 4. Charles is 4. Yeah. And so having done this, for 20 years, it gets better and it gets easier. And so I just want people to know that it's okay if that doesn't come easy. And if not every conversation sparks stuff like that, but know that it can, and allow yourself the freedom to try and to go after some of those and follow ideas, no matter how random they are. It's like, wait, how did we get on this? How did we get on this topic or this conversation? And allow
and how inspiring that is.
Yeah. It's just it is then your kids see you do it, right? So usually you lead by example. So when your kid sees you start asking these questions and then maybe looking something up and researching something or looking up a picture, what does this pottery look like? Then they'll realize that that's okay to do. So then they'll start asking questions and wanting to look things up and learn more about something. And so it takes a little bit for that kind of culture of reading to happen.
And practice exercising your curiosity. That's what you're doing, is you're getting curious about what you're reading. I will say, I guess, is that it is true that if you are doing your best to educate yourself on your own, like if a lot of the connections I make and things that come up as I'm reading children's books to my kids, this is connected to what I'm learning about right now. And because everything is so interconnected in the world, these things will come up organically. It's not like, well, what if what I'm reading has nothing to do with this? And I would argue that you can find a connection between almost anything.
Almost anything. Yeah, I would
Almost
agree.
anything.
And
Yes.
kids are so excited to make connections. I don't know if you noticed that, but I mean, the most random thing, my daughter will hear a word and she's like, "Oh, wait a second. Like, I've heard that word
I heard
somewhere
that.
else." Like when they
Yes,
can make
yes.
connections between things, I mean, they are so excited to be able to make connections. And so it takes a little bit of creating that kind of environment. Trying to think of, do you have any other stories?
I have one more example from this
Yeah.
book. So we
Ooh.
talked about economics and even the chemistry they talked about how does it get that green color? Well, there's some chemical reaction, and we haven't dived deep into this. Yeah, but like the science of the Celadon pottery, so iron is a pure metal, it's an element, and there was something about mixing it with wood ash that gave it that green color. So we need to dive into that more. I haven't done that yet. But then page 23.
And I want to say that your excitement is contagious, especially when they're young. And if you
That's
show
what really is coming through. It's not the
Yes.
information, it's your excitement about it.
And yeah, the things that a child will want to learn because you're excited about it, like they're just following you, right? I mean, eventually they shift into a different phase, but those, I would say up until, I mean, even when they're older, even in those older teenage years, I think they can still catch your excitement of things. But if you've been doing it while they're young, they get their own excitement about things. And then I think you shift a little bit of that shifts as a parent, and you're like, you then need to share in their excitement, like of all the connections that they're making and the knowledge that they're pulling and that they're sharing with
Yes.
you. So then you mirror that excitement and get excited with them. Whereas when they're younger,
Yes.
it's kind of that opposite where they're watching you get excited about something, so they're getting excited. Anyway, so
Absolutely. I love that.
did you find that place in
It's
the
like
book?
you're fueling their fire at first
Mhm.
when they're young, and then they start fueling their own fire.
And their curiosity keeps going too. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so what
I would say it's in the connections too that are the greatest. It's those connections that are the greatest aha moments. And maybe that's when the real learning moments occur, actually. Connecting something because it means that there's a significance to it. If it's connected to something you already know or have experienced.
I think that's why I caught in The Secret Garden the power of words and positive messages, is because we had been learning and talking about that just, as a family, we've been talking about that. And so I'd never caught that before until we were reading the story. We were reading The Secret Garden. And then that connection was, wait a second, that's exactly what's happening here in the story that was written. Like, this is not brand new information. This is not new science. Like, this story was written how long ago, and they were still talking about the power of positive thinking, but it was that connection that was happening, what we were talking about, separately, and then made the connection within our reading.
Yes, I love that. Okay. So this boy, main character, he's been spending a lot of time chopping wood with an axe, and it's, making his hands raw. He gets blisters and they pop. Very, very painful. So, and this is 12th century Korea. And so he says, Tree Ear held out his hand. Crane Man untied the bandage and began to unwrap it. Tree Ear is the main character, in case that's confusing. And Crane Man is the older man who they take care of each other now. Crane Man untied the bandage and began to unwrap it. Tree Ear hissed sharply in pain and snatched his hand away. The final layer of cloth clung stubbornly to the wound, and Crane Man had been trying to pull it off. Come now, my monkey friend, said Crane Man, kindly but firmly. It must be removed so we can clean the wound. The demons of sickness are no doubt already scheming to enter your body through such a door. And so we had this conversation about what does he mean by the demons of sickness? And of course, talked our way to, because I
The
don't want to just
germs.
give him the answer. I want
Yeah.
him to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's germs and bacteria. So interesting that the demons of sickness are scheming to enter your body through such a door. We just went down this, I don't remember the exact conversation, but had this conversation about, we had recently learned about in the past year, Ignaz Semmelweis, who in the 1840s discovered that hand washing, that he hadn't discovered germs. They didn't have microscopes powerful enough to see germs. But, he figured out that hand washing actually prevented so many deaths in the maternity ward of the hospital that he worked in. And so he knew that there was some invisible particles that were being transferred on their hands from the cadavers that they were dissecting in the other room to these women whose babies they were delivering. And then we had also read the story of Alexander Fleming and discovering antibiotics, of course, and that antibiotics didn't exist until then. And so we had this wonderful conversation where, really, it was me asking him questions like, so, what could happen if the germs get in there? Well, it could cause an infection. And they didn't have, what medicines did they have at the time to help cure it? Well, they didn't have antibiotics, he knew that antibiotics didn't exist then. And so that the infection, what happens is the bacteria can, if it spreads too much throughout your body, it will take over and kill you. And so that they needed to be concerned about that. But then they had their own herbs that they would use that could help prevent infection at the time too. And so this really cool, oh, that's right. He asked, we started talking about antibodies. That's what it was. And this is the first conversation that I had ever had with my youngest son about the immune system. And he said, well, what do antibodies look like? And then I looked up a picture on my phone and it's Y-shaped, and this really simple animation of how these Y-shaped antibodies will lock onto the virus, and that they're made just to fit that virus, and then they can kill it and get it out of the body. And how there are other elements in our immune system. But, again, this idea of, I couldn't even remember, I knew we had antibodies, but I didn't remember that they were Y-shaped. I don't know all these things, but hey, this is an opportunity to talk about biology and look it up. Let's do some research.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really cool. Super cool. One thing
go
that
ahead.
you said that I want to point out is you said, I didn't just want to give him the answer. And I think that's really important to note that so often as parents, we answer, somebody asks our kid a question, we answer it for them, like to hold back and allow them an opportunity to think and allow them to process it and wait for them to and encourage them. Like, there's no wrong, like, I'm learning here, you're learning here. Like, what do you think? And really listen to your child. And you're not waiting for them to say the exact right answer. Like, be curious, and then they give an answer, and then you give a follow-up, and allowing them the opportunity to take their curiosity and find answers and to really think about it is a little bit of a developed skill that we have. So I just want to point out, how cool it is that you've learned that skill, and to encourage people to develop that pause, right? That pause as a parent, to allow your kids to think and answer questions. Let's see, gaining knowledge through books. Well, we're always pausing and thinking and learning, and a lot of that in Little House on the Prairie.
I can think of some off the top of my head in
Like,
Little House on the Prairie.
So I remember reading that when I lived in Minnesota, and they have the sugar summer, or the sugar snow. That's what they called it. They call it the sugar snow.
Sugar snow.
And we talked about like the temperatures and how the temperatures changed and what does that mean. And since we lived in Minnesota at that time, we could actually we tapped our own tree. We had an ornamental maple tree. And so we tapped the tree. I will say that that's not the kind of sap that comes out of it. There are trees that give a sweeter taste than others, but
it wasn't a sugar maple.
Yeah. And then as we tapped it, what happens is there's this shift though of when the weather, the change in the temperature isn't happening between the night temperature and the day temperature. It's no longer dropping low enough. And so the water that you're getting, or the sap that you're getting out of the tree, whatever it is, it tastes like tree. It tastes like green instead of like that sweet stuff. So there was a lot that I know we've done and learned through Little House on the Prairie. My oldest, I remember her becoming obsessed with World War II. And she read every book out there. Like, she learned about World War II through stories. Of course, Corrie ten Boom. Pull the title out there for me, Angel.
The Hiding Place.
The Hiding Place. Books like that. She read all of these stories and gained so much information, so much that she actually asked for Mein Kampf, written by Hitler, for Christmas. I did not buy it, but she gained all the knowledge that she gained about World War II was from stories. She just gained it all through books.
And I would say, actually, that reminds me, just a quick interjection, the power of having multiple individual experiences or reading multiple individual perspectives versus someone, like a textbook is written almost like I'm trying to be an outsider's perspective and write an objective point of view. You actually get a much better idea of an event like World War II when you read about multiple experiences, different experiences, varied experiences, where I would actually say that, for a youth or adult, someone who is mature enough and old enough to read Mein Kampf and get Hitler's perspective, on his own life and his own point of view, actually would just, now, if that's the only book you're reading on World War II, that would not be healthy. But if you are getting varied perspectives, that would actually help you to understand the whole event even better.
And she's in law school now. I think that, like, her perspective, reading that now, or even if she had that knowledge, if she had read it earlier, would really play into what she's doing now within her world.
Only help to understand and to be able to understand an individual from their perspective. It can only help you. Does not mean you have to agree with them.
Which is a whole lesson in and of itself, right? Reading a story that and deciding whether you agree with it or not. If you agree with the person's actions, or if you would do the same thing, that's a really powerful thing to ask your kids. How would you respond in this? This is how this person responded. Would you do the same thing, or how would you handle this situation?
Yes, which brings us to character.
If this podcast was helpful for you, please leave us a review and share with a friend.
Until next time, start with stories and everything else will follow.
You can learn more about our other education projects at angelselda.com and wonderwelllearning.com.